Hi. So Riley and I are here to talk about shifting the mind to tender. We're almost at the end of the online show that's hosted by Backyard Ghosts. So we're going to have a casual conversation and talk a little bit about the paintings and sculpture and drawings that are on view at the Backyard Ghost website. And I'm Amanda Calobrisi, the artist.
And I am Riley James Yaxley. I'm a writer and a fundraising professional based out of Chicago. And I've known Amanda for, I think, almost 3 years now, um, which is very funny to think that time has passed so quickly. And yeah, I think that we've just had a really good chemistry over these past couple of years. So it's exciting to be able to like have a formal conversation about your work. Um, so I think I'm really interested in particular to hear a little bit more about this body of work and to kind of hear about the inspirations behind it. I know that you used the Monster X photographs, and I'm kind of curious about like the history behind how you discovered those and what the like impetus was to create a body of work from them.
Yeah, it feels like such a long story now because I've been working with uh, Monsieur X's photographs for 5 years.
Mhm.
That's a long time. It
Yeah.
might even be slightly longer than that. I feel like 2014 it was the first painting, so even longer. Anyway, it's been a long time. So the story of it is kind of fun, but I'll keep it short because I could talk about it forever. But
Mhm.
so like all things start, especially bodies of work, I was just browsing the internet
Mhm.
and it all came from the idea of thinking more specifically about not just the body but about genitalia. Came like specifically from these two paintings that I had done before this body of work, where I was working with models, people that I knew, and I created these two paintings um, based on a Greek sculpture that I had learned was in a position or a pose that was called anasirma. And the pose basically means lifting of skirt, lifting your skirts. And the sculpture that I saw, and at the time I had only seen one, but there are more. The sculpture that I saw was a marble sculpture of a woman lifting her skirt to reveal a penis.
Mhm.
And I was super fascinated with the sculpture, and did a little bit of research trying to find out what that symbolized or what the meaning was behind the sculpture. And the art historians that I looked to talked about different things. They talked about how the female genitals were really uncouth, and so Greek sculpture wouldn't put a vulva on a marble statue, this sort of thing.
Mhm.
But maybe it represented something else. So I kind of left it at this big mystery and didn't, like, as artists do, go as deep as like an art historian would. And
Mhm.
anyway, I posed three women with vulvas in a skirt lifting pose, and I did a painting of them. And then I worked with two friends who, transgender woman, transgender man, and we redid the pose together. And so those two paintings were like, I don't know, they were like a epiphany. Like I just thought, if you could say this about your own work, but I just felt like, wow, I'm really making something that I want to see. And what I see is really beautiful. And and a lot of that had to do with the people that were in the paintings. So I went on this, like, you know, search for images on the internet, and this, I don't even know what I was searching. I think I might have been searching something like, I was also thinking a lot about pubic hair at the time,
Mhm.
and how, again, uncouth pubic hair has come to be, or maybe it's coming back in fashion, but at the time it was like very uncouth. So I was like Googling something like, uh, hairy bushes, something really, eloquent and beautiful. And came up with this image, and I think I put like boudoir photography or something like this. And I come up with this small image. I couldn't even enlarge it to really see the people in the image. It was a teeny tiny, um, very pixelated thing. But there were three women standing with their backs to the wall, and the wall had this beautiful wallpaper that was like fleur de lily wallpaper, and they were all lifting their skirts and like kind of like looking down, I guess, trying to get a view of themselves, and I thought, what a weird picture. Like, there's literally nothing to see from above, like, nothing to see. And that really cracked me up. Like, I just thought that was so funny. And then to do that, like, together, as a group, I was like, like, one person was kind of like looking a little bit over at the other, just a little bit like side eye. And I was like, this is great. I'm going to make a painting of it. And I made this little painting, probably like 12 by 9 or something like this. And I did it in acrylic paint really quick, a lot of like pencil mark you could even see. Anyway, I loved the painting because I think I loved the image so much. And then I just kind of put it away, and I didn't think about it anymore, and I started just working on whatever else I was thinking about. And then about 2 years later, this is my abbreviated version of the story too. 2 years later, an acquaintance of mine who I also hadn't talked to in a long time, he sent me an email with the link, and he said, I think you would really like this book that just came out. It was called like Prostitutes. I think I have it. It was called Prostitutes, um, from 1925 to 1935. I didn't even know anything about it. I don't even know if I really read the synopsis or whatever was there. I just ordered it. I was like, this seems cool and I want it. So I ordered it. I got the book. I started looking at it. And I was like really digging it because it wasn't your typical boudoir photography. It was very awkward and weird and not very sensual, like in the way that the male view sort of is supposed to be in that boudoir photo thing. Anyway, I start to notice the same wallpaper from that image I found on the internet.
Gotcha.
And then I find not only the actual picture, but now printed in a book, but a whole like series from that photo shoot in the book. So the three women standing in front of that patterned wallpaper. And I was like, I was in awe. Like, I was like, what is this magic that just happened to me? It's like that image is haunting me. And
Yeah.
it came back and it gave me more. So ever since then, I've been working with this imagery, not singularly at the beginning. It was kind of like a side project. It was like something that I could return to when the other work I was doing, which was like from models and staged stuff that I was doing with my friends. This was like something I could do when I just wanted to like hang out with funny imagery.
Mhm.
It was like something else, a side project. And it didn't really become a singular mode of making until maybe, I don't know, like 4 years ago.
Yeah. And I feel like that was around the time that I like kind of like got to know you and discovered your work was very much like seeing that like shift and development and like expansion of that part of your practice. Um, and actually like having like living with a few of your paintings because I have three of them now. And I think they're all from earlier on. I think two from during your MFA time, and then one from when you were at what is it, St. Xavier's?
Maybe.
I think that green, like you're transforming into
Oh,
a bird.
yeah. Mhm.
Uh,
That
with,
it's actually was made much earlier than that, but I had a a solo show at the school, and that was one of the paintings that were in the show. That was in the
I
show.
gotcha. I was like, I know there's history there.
Yeah.
Um, and I think a lot of those earlier works feel a little bit more like self-portraiture and from those like real models and stage
Mhm.
photographs that you were taking. And so I'm a little bit curious, like um, about that shift away from doing like self-portraiture and live models towards working from photographs.
Yeah. Well, self-portraiture was what I started with, and it makes a lot of sense because, hey, you're there all the time, and you know you're available. And I worked with mostly just myself for the first like 10 years of being a painter.
Mhm.
Once in a while, I would do a painting of another person. Like had done a painting of Charlie, I think one painting of Charlie before I went to grad school, but it was all me all the time. And I felt really comfortable with that because I
Mhm.
knew that I wanted to think about psychology and I wanted to think about sort of orchestrating narratives of some kind, even if they were really ambiguous. I wanted to make a picture that had complexity to it and a sort of like making a vision of something internal, external,
Mhm.
and I knew I could feel like comfortable doing that with myself. But when I worked with somebody else, I felt really like nervous about likeness. Like,
Mhm.
am I a good enough painter to capture this other person's likeness? And then also like be brave enough to reveal something about their like interior state. Like,
Yeah.
how can you do that without knowing the person? Right. And so like I really stressed myself out about that sort of thing. And the only other person I had painted before I came to grad school was my friend's daughter, who was like 3 or 4 at the time. And I felt pretty comfortable like working with her. She's now in college and she's at SAIC, but she was the first person I painted outside of like my family unit, you know, like Charlie and I and the cats. Um, but yeah, so it took a lot of, I think, sort of skill building before I even felt confident enough to move on to um, other models. And then somewhere after grad school, I was taking like Butoh dance classes and like trying to really like be somebody else because I felt like really bored with just painting me, you
Mhm.
know? And I had gotten some like, you know, snarky comment from somebody at an open studio um, where he said, "Are you just going to paint yourself just like looking this way and looking that way forever?"
Mhm.
And what makes people have the balls to say those things? I don't know. But like I just thought like, okay, this person, it's not like I respect them so much that like I have to take this, you know, to heart. But I kind of thought about it like, yeah, like what am I doing? Like just painting cool clothes and a cool haircut and makeup. Like what am I doing? And so I try to bring more content and more movement and dynamism into the um, compositions, thinking about dance. And at the time I was friends with a lot of performance artists that were using their bodies to talk about all sorts of things. So all these things are coming together. And eventually I just took on painting these other people that were around me, and most of them were like super exhibitionists or at least moderately exhibitionists, you know, like people that dress really cool and like to show that. So like they would sit for me and I felt like I was taking little steps towards like it becoming bigger than a portrait, and that it was becoming something that was more about like poetry and psychology with somebody else. But I still was really holding back,
Mhm.
even with the people that were my friends and acquaintances and artists and things. Um, because again, like when you're working with somebody else, like, is it a collaboration? And part of you knows it is, So then it's like, well, how much can I project and how much of it should be like given from them? And so I think I really found my comfort zone when I started working with these ladies in
Mhm.
the photographs, because it's a different sort of collaboration, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. And I think I kind of what you were talking about, I think in similar terms, I've experienced that with writing, is it's like super comfortable writing about myself.
Yeah.
When I do it for about artists or curators or like other writers, I get so like the anxiety just seeps in where I'm like, who am I to like have a say on anything?
Yeah.
But I think it's a little bit a part of that. Like at some point, you realize and like develop and mature as a creator and
Mhm.
as an artist, and you realize that you just have to like take the authority to work with other subjects and trust that you'll do it in a way um, similar to where you respect and like treat yourself with that full kind of um, treatment in the art that you'll do that for a subject.
Yeah.
Um, and I think in some ways that's what kind of shines through in some of these recent paintings is like how much care you take for the subjects that are represented in them. Because
Mhm.
I feel like they could uh, like people could perceive them as like very pornographic or fetishistic or some type of way, but they don't feel that way to me. Like there's this like very intimate, like sensual element to them that feels like you actually get an experience of the like women and subjects of the paintings rather than um, you're just like observing them in these kind of like vulnerable positions.
Yeah. And I think it's like it's a really sort of slippery slope, because, even if most viewers aren't like avid um uh watchers or voyeurs of pornography, we
Mhm,
know that there's certain poses that are used in a pornographic sense.
mhm,
And so it's like it's a slippery slope, because it's like, how can I? And I mean, this is what drove me to do this body of work, is how can I use a pose or a gesture that everybody will say it's pornographic, or that it is uh, found in that context usually. How can I take something that's like so strongly a signifier of that and make it something else?
mhm,
Like, why do human beings give themselves such difficult positions? Like, because I could have chose something so much easier to work with, but I think that I just really wanted to challenge myself, because when I saw these images, I saw everything in them
mhm,
louder than what they were intended for.
mhm,
And like the intention of the photograph, you know, was pornographic or erotic. Let's say it was erotic photography. Some of the photos that that the photographer has taken, aren't interesting to me, because they tip into a place that is pornographic and less erotic, and then I can see less in it. Like, there's a whole suite of photographs in the book that involves usually a singular or a duo women with a banana,
mhm,
you know? And these images, it takes all the romance out of looking at a picture, like it becomes something else. It becomes somebody's specific fetish. And like that specificity is really uninteresting to me. Like, when I look at a painting, I don't want to know everything about it in the first 10 minutes of looking at it. If
Mhm.
I can see everything in 10 minutes, then it's just not my taste of painting, you know?
Yeah.
And so I'm sort of curating when I'm looking at the pictures. I'm like choosing, you know, what images I can use that have more poetry or psychology or narrative to them that
Mhm.
takes a little time and also maybe like has some complexity to it that can be even amplified more in its transformation into paint or drawing or sculpture.
Yeah, and I think that was reading through kind of the perspectives for the exhibition, that idea of um, you're taking these photos that are taken by or through the male gaze of like they're taken and meant to be catered to this male gaze, and somehow you kind of subvert it and uh, twist it in a way that I'm even just looking at the painting behind you, like it doesn't feel like it feels like I'm looking at it, but it's not like I feel like I'm more so taking this perspective that you would have, where it's like you see this like deeper complexity,
Mhm.
um, where to me it almost feels like um, the relationship between the women is so unclear, and I'm not interested in it in this like erotic sense. Um, and I think that the skirt lifting as a like visual motif is so interesting because it's comical in a lot of ways, in the unexpected. Like it just is funny, and so it like takes me off balance of like I don't know or I haven't like my eye has not been visually trained to like see it and understand what it means in the context of the painting.
Yeah.
So I think that's so interesting that you found a way to work with it and kind
Yeah.
of create that.
I also think, you know, because there in, you know, art history or in mythology, we find that pose, um, and sometimes it is funny. Like in mythology, in Greek mythology, there is Balbo, and she was like a demigoddess, I think, and she was sort of like she was kind of like taking care of Demeter. I hope I'm right when I say that. She was taking care of Demeter, who was mourning her daughter, who was banished from Earth. And Balbo, you know, we see her whenever we see images of her. We always see her lifting her skirt, but showing her ass instead of showing her vulva. And it's still anacerma, you know, the lift because it's lifting of skirt. And she was actually just trying to get Demeter to laugh
Mhm.
and stop grieving. So it was like a way to like bring some normalcy through this like, you know, shocking gesture. So there it has that too. But it also is kind of scary in a way, not like scary, but like shocking to see an image of a woman intentfully lifting her skirt and looking at you like the direction is at you. There's something a bit um like takes your breath away kind of. And when you see some of the sculptures or drawings and such, um it does, it kind of knocks you out a little bit. I don't know, did you see during the civil unrest in Seattle, there was a woman who performed
Mhm.
Anacerma in the street. And it takes your breath away because you're in such a vulnerable
Mhm.
position, right? Like I never could imagine that happening in the real world, you know, in this world. And so seeing those images, it was very takes your breath away.
Yeah, and I think we've loaded or like so much meaning is like built into the genitals, and like so much vulnerability is enmeshed with them, particularly the vulva, that um, the like revealing of it feels so monumental, and it's like almost this like um, it's like you're revealing like your like barest identity, and you're like, you know, and
Yeah.
okay, look at me like at my most vulnerable, and like I'm not afraid, or like I'm not abashed, or like shy to reveal this about myself. And there's like that kind of tension that's created there of you're like uncomfortable at the idea of somebody being so like brazen about that part of their body.
Hmm. Yeah, there's a really great book. I think it's called The Sacred Display, and it's a collection. Two art historians wrote it and collected all of the imagery from around the world of statuary and figurines and things that are in this sort of position, revealing. And I mean, it's a pose that you see all over the world at all different periods of time and for all different reasons, but it seems like this sort of like there's a mystical connection between the vulva and the earth, so that, mother goddess or what have you, that seems to repeat everywhere in this sort of like sacred display. So to see it in 2020 on the street and to a line of police officers, it was really, really intense. I don't know who that woman was, and I don't think we should actually ever know because she's like an enigma or something. It's
I
pretty.
think shatter the image has like cultural relevance, or like cultural, it's culturally charged now, and I
Mm,
think by situating it in a specific body, it almost kind of takes some of that power away.
yeah. Yeah, and she was so elegant, like it was really beautiful. I think with these girls that these women that I'm working with in the paintings, like I'm kind of like I love more like awkwardness
Mhm.
and bizarre sort of poses and postures and that sort of thing. Um I'm trying to think, like I feel like the most monumental painting that I've made using that gesture would probably be the earlier two pink paintings that I made of people that I knew. They definitely get that like monumental quality. But maybe these kind of tilt a little bit toward Balbo and have a little bit more humor
Mhm.
to them than monumental. I don't know. Maybe I just can't see the work that clearly since it's recent and not as removed as, say, the pink paintings were.
Yeah, I think from my memory of having seen those, I think those were actually two of the first paintings that I ever saw of yours. Uh, when I followed you on Instagram, and I was like, oh my God, I'm like obsessed. But it's they had that kind of contemporary feel to them, where like I knew um, in some way that they had been done from like real models or from some sort of relationship. And
Mm,
I think that in this body of work that you're showing now, there's that element of like I think it's the clothing and the hairstyles a lot of the times with the women, is that it's apparent that it's a different time,
mm,
but it's not, like it's kind of unmoored and uncertain of like the setting and the time and the place of
mm.
like I don't know where they are, and so it's kind of a fantastical element where it feels a little bit more removed, and I think that's why it can be a little more funny, or
And
unsettling in some ways.
yeah, and a little bit more otherworldly.
Yeah.
Because I also put a lot of effort into the images not feeling like 1930,
Hmm.
because like the photographs were taken at a very specific time. Um, and I try to remove that a little bit, like
Hmm.
often in the photographs the women are wearing like lots of undergarments that are, from that time period, like garters and stockings and all kinds of weird contraptions hanging down. And I never paint those because I do want there to be this sort of like different world sort of feel, like a little bit removed from actual world or nameable world.
Yeah. And I think that comes through a lot with the sculptures for me.
Mm,
Like those are the one like the moments where I feel like we've completely departed from like they feel less like you're translating a photograph and you're taking it one step further of like you're translating it into this really like fluid and kind of in between space.
yeah, I agree. I think that that's always my relationship to the photograph has always been this sort of like ongoing struggle, like how tied am I to the photograph and how important is it in the end, and I think over the last, you know, 12, 15 years, I've really departed from that feeling of having to replicate the photograph, and I really use the photograph as a departure point.
Yeah.
But that being said, in the paintings, they're pretty close to the compositions in the paintings. And so I think at a certain point, especially after doing like dozens of graphite drawings from the photographs, I really started to just like invent more and more and more within the drawing. And then I started taking the drawings and making paintings from the drawings to remove just a little bit more, and not be so tied to the photograph. And then when I started doing the sculptures, which I wish I've done more, I really love making the sculptures. Sometimes it's just hard to do everything. But the first couple sculptures that I did, which are in the show, they're freestanding in the round pairs. One is purple and one is yellow. And it was really such a challenge and so exciting to use a material that I had never used before. And to take a photograph and then make it into something three-dimensional was like mind blowing and really, really hard. And then somewhere about maybe 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I took a ceramics class at SAIC, and I took an actual class. So here I am like learning different methods of hand building and carving and all this. And I got I saw some sort of relief sculpture. And I thought, I want to do that. I want to try to translate the photographs into something that's not in the round, but something that, projects out of a flat space. And as I was working with those, I started thinking more and more about Sheila Nagig. I don't know if you know Sheila Nagig sculptures, but I think that that merging of like the Sheila Nagig character, like this gargoyle-esque kind of thing, really fit well in this relief format. And because I'm just not like a masterful sculptor, all of these exaggerations started happening, and then I could become sort of more conscious and intentful with them. And so they really move away from the photographs and become something that feels a little bit more, I guess, like a gargoyle, or like something you would see, like, I don't know. I just watched Midsummer again, and I was like thinking about, the drawings and such on the wall. They start to feel more narrative, and they start to feel like they have like a meaning that's beyond where the paintings have gone. They're, I can't think of the word, but like they not monumental, but they feel more.
There's like a new life that's almost breathed into them. Like they've taken on like in the paintings and the drawings, I think they have this kind of narrative and this sense of being. But when you look at the sculptures, you feel this completely different sense of like animation. Like there's a different energy there. And I think that's like, as a writer, I think about that too, of like when I cross over genres or kind of mediums, I guess, of like sometimes I write poetry and then I realize the poem actually like I want to translate it into a long essay or into a fiction, or I want to go from a fiction to an essay, or from an essay to fiction.
Mhm.
And there's always that kind of discovery of the unexpected, of like new elements. And I
It's
think that your
like
sculpture,
shape shifting. It has like a shape shifting thing that happens when you go from one medium to the other. Even if you're taking the same exact core idea, it becomes something else, you know?
because the sculptures themselves feel less human in some ways, and so there's a different treatment to them than in your paintings, where in the paintings I feel this very humanistic uh, like connection to them,
Mm,
whereas in the sculptures they feel like somehow I can relate less to them as like a being,
yeah.
and
Huh.
I'm more intrigued by the action and relationship between them in a different way.
Yeah. They feel more like mythological for
Mm.
sure to me. And I started to notice that they feel more that way when I start titling them, because you're right, like they feel less like maybe they're like demigoddesses or something, like they feel like a little bit otherworldly
Mhm.
when they move to clay. And I really would like to just make more of them, because I feel like they're very new to me, even though some of them are now like 4 or 5 years old, because I don't work on it every day. I don't work in clay every day. There's still so many surprises and so much spontaneity that they're a little bit like um unruly. Like I don't have total control of them. Not that I feel like I need total control, but I guess I just don't think about them as much as the paintings. And so hearing you talk about it is actually really interesting, because yeah, they feel like at the beginning of their being.
Mhm. Yeah, and it feels like that kind of similar to what you were talking about earlier, that like maturing of your art process where you're shifting away from self-portraiture to live models and portraiture towards kind of working from this photographic source material,
Mhm.
where now it feels like in some ways you're like taking this next leap to be like, I'm a painter, but I can make these forays into sculpture. And it's a new and interesting way to think about what you've been working with.
Yeah. I mean, the great thing, well, what feels great in retrospect, when I was just painting, it feels like you have enough time to just paint. And then, then the next thing comes in, like I'm doing all of these graphite drawings, and there's always a reason why you start something. Like I was teaching so many classes and I had no time to paint, so I was like, what can I do like in a 3-hour block before I leave for school? And that's how those graphite drawings came about. And so now, at that point I was painting and doing the graphite drawings, and then the clay comes in. And the clay comes in because it's like I want to not know how to do something. And I want to feel completely like um, new and spontaneous. And I want to make exaggerations and strange moves. And I wasn't really feeling like I could do that in painting for some reason. And so clay comes along, and now you're doing drawings, you're doing paintings, you're doing clay. And then I went to Japan for a couple of summers, and when I was in Japan, I wasn't working in oil. I had to learn how to use acrylic, which I hadn't used very much at all. And then I started loving acrylic paints, like loving how I can build layers so quickly. And so I'm like acrylic, oil paint, clay, graphite, and then the watercolors and the gouache. And so it's like, okay, how the heck do you do 5 things? Like now I feel a little stretched thin. And so, like when talking about the sculpture, I feel a little bit of melancholy, because I would like to do more and be more familiar, and have, more concrete intentions with my clay pieces. But because it's so like here and there that I'm working in clay, I feel like it's like a friend that you don't call enough on the phone, and so you wonder if you're still friends.
I mean, I feel that's a similar like sentiment to writing, where like I'll go through phases where it's like I used to write like a poem a day for so long because I was in school and working full time, and it was like boom, boom, boom. I can churn out a poem quickly. Can't write an essay like over the course of a semester when you're doing all this other work. And now I don't write poems that often because I have the time to like focus on long work.
Hmm.
When I do it, it feels you get that like sense of like I've kind of like lost my sense of it. And I don't know, at least for me, there's that kind of sense of like fear and like, oh, like I used to be able to do this really well, or like did it really interestingly a few times, and now I'm not sure how to
Hmm.
approach it again. So I don't know, like if you feel that's like an opportunity for you, or if that's like something that you're like intimidated by, like returning to that media.
Yeah, I think like all artists are just like our own Achilles heel, you know? Like we create all these mental obstacles that make doing anything so hard. um but I think like the reason why, so I work with an air dry clay at home, and then at SAIC when I was taking the class I was able to work in clay and use the kiln. So I think if I want to do ceramics, I need to go somewhere and do the ceramics there. Now, that being said, there's a place like literally down the street. So I need to, really take some serious motions into becoming part of that. But that's sort of the thing that kept me from doing as much after I took the class, because I realized the difference between the air dry clay and the ceramics. That it was sort of, it feels a little bit like wasting my time to do the air dry clay because it's just not as durable. So I can work in clay, the air dry clay, anytime I want at home, but I've convinced myself that it's not durable and that I really should, you know, go back and get to a ceramic studio. And with the pandemic, that, of course, put a little, uh, you know,
But I think that's fair too. It's like you want your work out of materials that you know will last if that's your intention. Like I'm creating something that like I want it to have a life. I know some artists create stuff that they're like, I want it to fall apart and be ephemeral, but
yeah,
um,
I
yeah,
haven't gotten to that point yet.
yeah, I'm very intrigued by it. I think I had a really interesting period where I loved like artwork that felt precarious and like always difficult to keep.
Yeah.
Um, but that was more so, I think, like voyeuristic as a writer who like very much is like I want to write permanent things that are like fixed.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
I think that it's really hard for me because my teachers in undergrad, um, they really taught me to love my materials, and those materials were, more, they were traditional materials, and they talked so much about, archival paper and the way to do things for longevity. And so that's like the foundation of my becoming an artist. And so I think it's just drilled in too hard. I don't think I'll ever be somebody. I made a relief sculpture in my ceramics class that blew up in the kiln, and like this is totally new for me because paintings don't blow up, and like oil paintings, they're so malleable that if you kind of have a bad day, you can wipe that down and change it forever and forever. But with the ceramics, like there were so many things that go wrong, and I don't know if I'm cool with it yet, but I had some of the experiences. And that first relief sculpture that blew up in the kiln, I like took the pieces and I like, should I save them? Like I'm not used to ephemeral art at all.
well, I do want to be mindful of the fact that I think we're quickly moving up on almost the hour mark. Uh,
Okay. Well,
so
we can
maybe
chat. We know how to chat, you and I.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So maybe we wrap this up. Do you have anything else you want to say about the work?
Um, I guess, I'm just excited to see where it all goes, the never ending sort of unfolding of it all. But it does blow my mind that it's been, this long working with this imagery and I'm still so absorbed by I would have never predicted from that very first photograph that I would be looking at this man's work for so long and finding so much in it. And I think the reason why it is sort of this like opportunity for like endless meditations or endless sort of modifications from the photographs is that the women in it, in the images, are just, they're so strong and they're just like so liberated for their time, and they're so comfortable and happy with each other, that I really like empathize with them, and I really almost want to be them sometimes, especially after this year of just like being alone, or with our families in our homes. Is like they're kind of become like friends.
Yeah.
And I've always tended to have friends that are exhibitionists, so maybe that isn't such a big leap for me, but for somebody else it might be. But yeah, I feel like I'm starting to recognize them, as people. And I think the intention of these photographs were not that. And so I think that's kind of a really special relationship to have with photographs from another time, you know,
Yeah. And I think
that
that's
I have intimacy with those photographs.
yeah. And I think that's like because you've worked with them for so long now. That's like the natural progression. And I think like there's always that kind of as like artists or creators, like we always have those things that we come back to again and again that like kind of is the source material, is the thing that like feels like it connects us to some sort of like thing that's outside of ourselves, it's bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
It makes it feel meaningful.
And the nice thing is that there are questions that can never be answered,
Mm,
and so they are not people that anybody recorded their history,
mhm,
and we won't know more about them. I wrote to an art historian who a lot of the pictures are the actual photographs are part of his collection.
mhm,
And I had read somewhere on the internet that some of the photographs that Mr. X took had the girls' names written on the back side of the photographs. And I wrote to this art historian, and really wanted to know their names,
mhm.
and he was like, I don't have any with their names on the back. And I thought, you know what? It's okay, because maybe it's too much to know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
it might shatter the kind of like um mystical element that they hold now, where like they can be this like unknown thing that you're constantly wanting more from and won't get it.
Yeah. And not only are they left in this sort of anonymity, but so is the photographer. And I think that's pretty cool of him. I don't know, maybe I'm giving him more credit than he deserves, but I think it's pretty cool that he never came out with who he was either. It's almost like he's putting himself on the same plane in history with the girls. And I
Yeah.
don't know if I just made up that narrative, but I like to think about it that way. And
Mhm.
um, yeah, that it was almost like a way to put himself in the same place. So
Mhm.
I have respect for him, even though I'm always trying to banish the male gaze. I do think that that's something really cool about Mr. X, is that he to history he left himself just as anonymous as the women in the pictures.
Yeah. No, that's incredible.
Good. All right, well, shall we end it there?
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful ending.
Great. Great.